Talks with Ramana Maharshi. Talk 14. Realization exists beyond expression. An old man came and sat in the hall. Maharishi was reading Sharma's revised Sanskrit edition of Arunachala Akshara Manamalai, the first of his 5 devotional songs on Arunachala. The man asked softly, "It is said that self-realization is beyond expression, and expression always fails to describe the realization. How is it?" Maharshi: "The point has been mentioned in Arunachala Ashtakam, verse 2, where it is admitted that although the expression of realization is impossible, still its existence is indicated." Soon after, there were visible signs of emotion in the man. His breath was deep and hard, and he fell on the floor, prostrating humbly, and got up only after 1 or 2 minutes. Remaining calm a brief while, he left the place. Evidently, the man had some illumination. He sought confirmation from Maharishi, who responded fittingly. He found confirmation and humbly and feelingly acknowledged the divine intercession on his behalf. Talk 15. Supreme Spirit is subtle. A question was asked about the Upanishadic passage, "The Supreme Spirit is subtler than the subtlest and larger than the largest." Maharshi: "Even the structure of the atom has been found by the mind. Therefore, the mind is subtler than the atom. That which is behind the mind, namely the individual soul, is subtler than the mind." Further, the Tamil saint Manikavachagar has said of the specks dancing in a beam of sunlight that if each represents a universe, the whole sunlight will represent the Supreme Being. Talk 16. Guest to see Maharishi. Mr. Douglas Ainsley, also known as Mr. Grant Duff, an aristocratic English gentleman, 70 years old, nephew of a former governor of Madras, an author and poet formerly attached to the British legation in Athens, Paris, and The Hague, had come to Madras as a guest of Government House. He came to see Maharishi with a letter of introduction from Paul Brunton. Next day he returned and remained a little less than an hour in the hall. On both days, practically no words were exchanged, but only gaze meeting gaze. His habits are abstemious. He remains without food of any kind till 1 p.m. and then lunches. He is said to have coffee and biscuits in the evening and retires without any further food. He has been a bachelor all along, walks a few miles a day on an empty stomach, speaks little, and is very graceful in his movements. His voice is low and soft, and his words appear to come from his heart. He has friends among whom might be counted the late Sir John Woodruff, Sir Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, and Professor Thomas, Sanskrit professor in Oxford University. He expressed a desire to hear the Vedas. On Monday, a letter arrived from Riga, and the questions there happened to coincide with the questions the European visitor had asked relating to the existence of departed souls and how best to serve them. The reply that was sent to Riga was read out to him. Tamil songs from Maharishi's Truth Revealed and the Vedas were repeated in his presence. he considered the recitations magnificent. He came the next afternoon and, to the wonder of others, had an experience on the previous night which he repeated to Maharishi. It was that he had seen something like an electric light within himself in the heart center on the right side, and he added further that he had seen the sun shining within. Maharishi smiled a little and then had a translation of Atma Vidya, self-knowledge, read out to him, wherein there is the cryptic saying that realization consists in reaching the Atman, the self, which is the expanse of consciousness, Chid Vyoman, as distinguished from the mind, which is the expansion of Chitta Vyoman, mind consciousness. This explanation appealed to him. Speaking of him later, Maharishi remarked as follows: "Just think of an old man of 70 not choosing to live peacefully in his own house on the income he had earned. How intense has been his earnestness that he has left his native land, dared a sea voyage of 6,000 miles, and faced the hardships of long railway journeys in a foreign land, ignorant of the language, undergoing the vicissitudes of a lonely life, submitting to the inclemency of a hot climate, in surroundings uncongenial and unaccustomed to him. He could have been happy in his own house. It is his longing for internal peace that has brought him here." Yes, indeed. People say the intensity of his earnestness is revealed by his illuminating experiences here within 4 days of his arrival. Talk 16 continued. No reason to mourn. The European visitor asked, relating to the existence of departed souls and how best to serve them. With regard to the question concerning departed souls, so long as a man identifies himself with his physical body, the thought materialized as physical manifestations must be real to him. Because his body is imagined to have originated from another physical being, the other exists as truly as his own body. Having existed here once, it certainly survives death, because the offspring is still here and feels he has been born of the other. Under these circumstances, the other world is true, and the departed souls are benefited by prayers offered for them. On the other hand, considered in a different way, the one reality is the self, from whom has sprung the ego, which contains within itself the seeds of predispositions acquired in previous births. The self illumines the ego, the predispositions, and also the senses, whereupon the predispositions appear to the senses to have materialized as the universe and become perceptible to the ego, the reflection of the self. The ego identifies itself with the body and so loses sight of the self, and the result of this inadvertence is dark ignorance and the misery of the present life. The fact of the ego rising from the self and forgetting it is birth. So it may be said that the birth of an individual has killed the mother. The present desire to regain one's mother is in reality the desire to regain the self, which is the same as realizing oneself or the death of the ego. This is surrender unto the mother so she may live eternally. Maharishi then read out from the Tamil version of Yoga Vashishta the story of Dirgha Tapasi who had two sons, Punya, virtue, and Papa, sin. After the death of the parents, the young one mourned the loss, and the elder brother consoled him as follows. Why do you mourn the loss of our parents? I shall tell you where they are. They are only within ourselves, and are ourselves. Because the life current has passed through innumerable incarnations, births and deaths, pleasures and pains, etc., just as the water current in a river flows over rocks, pits, sands, elevations, and depressions on its way, but still the current is unaffected. Again, the pleasures and pains, births and deaths, are like undulations on the surface of seeming water in the mirage of the ego. The only reality is the self, from where the ego appears and runs through thoughts which manifest themselves as the universe, and in which the mothers and fathers, friends and relatives appear and disappear. They are nothing but manifestations of the self, so that one's parents are not outside the self. So there is no reason to mourn. Learn it, realize it, and be happy. Talk 17. English Scholars' Questions. Mr. W. Y. Evans Wentz, an English research scholar of Oxford University, brought a letter of introduction from Mr. Brunton and arrived on a visit. He was tired after his journey and required rest. He is quite accustomed to Indian ways of living, having visited this country several times. He has learned the Tibetan language and helped in the translation of the Book of the Dead and the life of Milarepa, the greatest of Tibetan yogis, and a third book on the Tibetan secret doctrines. In the afternoon, he began to ask a few questions. They related to yoga. He wanted to know if it was right to kill animals such as tigers, deer, etc., and use the skin for yoga posture, asana. Maharshi. The mind is the tiger or the deer. Visitor. If everything be illusion, then one can take lives? Maharshi. To whom is illusion? Find that out. In fact, everyone is a killer of the self, Atmahan, every moment of his life. Visitor. Which posture, asana, is the best? Maharshi. Any asana, possibly Sukhasana, easy, comfortable posture or position. But that is immaterial for jnana, the path of knowledge. Visitor. Does posture indicate the temperament? Maharshi. Yes. Visitor. What are the properties and effects of the tiger's skin, wool, or deer skin, etc.? Maharshi. Some have found them out and related them in yoga books. They correspond to conductors and non-conductors of magnetism, etc. But it is all immaterial for the path of knowledge, jnana marga. Posture really means location and steadfastness in the self. It is internal. The others refer to external positions. Talk 17 continued. English scholar asks more questions. Visitor. Which time is most suitable for meditation?
Maharshi.
What is time?
Visitor.
Tell me what it is.
Maharshi.
Time is only an idea. There is only the reality. Whatever you think it is, it looks like that. If you call it time, it is time. If you call it existence, it is existence, and so on. After calling it time, you divide it into days and nights, months, years, hours, minutes, etc. Time is immaterial for the path of knowledge, but some of these rules and discipline are good for beginners.
Visitor.
What is Jnana Marga?
Maharshi.
Concentration of the mind is in a way common to both knowledge and yoga. Yoga aims at union of the individual with the universal, the reality. This reality cannot be new. It must exist even now, and it does exist. Therefore, the path of knowledge tries to find out how Viyoga, separation, came about. The separation is from the reality only.
Visitor.
What is illusion?
Maharshi.
To whom is the illusion? Find it out. Then illusion will vanish. Generally, people want to know about illusion and do not examine to whom it is. It is foolish. Illusion is outside and unknown. But the seeker is considered to be known and is inside. Find out what is immediate and intimate instead of trying to find out what is distant and unknown.
Visitor.
Does Maharishi advise any physical posture for the Europeans?
Maharshi.
It may be advisable. However, it must be clearly understood that meditation is not prohibited in the absence of asanas or prescribed times or any accessories of the kind.
Visitor.
Does Maharishi have any particular method to impart to the Europeans in particular?
Maharshi.
It is according to the mental equipment of the individual. There is indeed no hard and fast rule. Talk 17 continued. Work, practice, celibacy. Mr. Evans Wentz began to ask questions, mostly relating to yoga preliminaries, for all of which Maharishi replied that they are aids to yoga, which is itself an aid to self-realization, the goal of all.
Visitor.
Is work an obstruction to self-realization?
Maharshi.
No. For a realized being, the self alone is the reality, and actions are only phenomenal, not affecting the self. Even when he acts, he has no sense of being an agent. His actions are only involuntary, and he remains a witness to them without any attachment. There is no aim for this action. Even one who is still practicing the path of wisdom, jnana, can practice while engaged in work. It may be difficult in the earlier stages for a beginner, but after some practice, it will soon be effective, and the work will not be found a hindrance to meditation.
Visitor.
What is the practice?
Maharshi.
Constant search for I, the source of the ego. Find out, who am I? The pure I is the reality, the absolute existence, consciousness, bliss. When that is forgotten, all miseries crop up. When that is held fast, the miseries do not affect the person.
Visitor.
Is not brahmacharya, celibacy, necessary for realization of the self?
Maharshi.
Brahmacharya is living in Brahman. It has no connection with celibacy as commonly understood. A real brahmachari, that is, one who lives in Brahman, finds bliss in the Brahman, which is the same as the self. Why then should you look for other sources of happiness? In fact, the emergence from the self has been the cause of all the misery.
Visitor.
Celibacy is an essential condition for yoga?
Maharshi.
So it is. Celibacy is certainly an aid to realization among so many other aids.
Visitor.
Is it then not indispensable? Can a married man realize the self?
Maharshi.
Certainly. It is a matter of fitness of mind. Married or unmarried, a man can realize the self, because that is here and now. If it were not so, but attainable by some efforts at some other time, and if it were new and something to be acquired, it would not be worthy of pursuit, because what is not natural cannot be permanent either. But what I say is that the self is here and now and alone. Talk 17 continued. War and crime. Mr. Evans Wentz asked about loss of life.
Visitor.
God being immanent in all, one should not take life of any kind. Is society right in taking the life of a murderer? Can the state do so either? The Christian countries begin to think that it is wrong to do so.
Maharshi.
What is it that prompted the murderer to commit the crime? The same power awards him the punishment. Society or the state is only a tool in the hands of the power. You speak of one life taken away, but what about innumerable lives lost in wars?
Visitor.
Quite so. Loss of lives is wrong anyway. Are wars justified?
Maharshi.
For a realized man, the one who remains ever in the self, the loss of one or several or all lives either in this world or in all the three worlds makes no difference. Even if he happens to destroy them all, no sin can touch such a pure soul. Maharishi quoted the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, verse 17. He who is free from the notion of ego, whose intellect is unattached, though he annihilates all the worlds, he slays not, nor is he bound by the results of his actions.
Visitor.
Do not one's actions affect the person in after births?
Maharshi.
Are you born now? Why do you think of other births? The fact is that there is neither birth nor death. Let him who is born, ego, think of death and remedies. Talk 17 continued. Self-realization and bliss. Mr. Evans Wentz asked questions about self-realization and Samadhi, perfect bliss.
Visitor.
How long did it take Maharshi to realize the self?
Maharshi.
This question is asked because the name and form are perceived. These are the perceptions consequent on the identification of the ego with the physical body. If the ego identifies itself with the subtle mind, as in dream, the perceptions are subtle also. But in sleep there are no perceptions. Still, was there not the ego? Unless it was, there cannot be the memory of having slept. Who was it that slept? You did not say in your sleep that you slept. You say it now in your wakeful state. The ego, therefore, is the same in wakefulness, dream, and sleep. Find out the underlying reality behind these states. That is the reality underlying these. In that state, there is being alone. There is no you, nor I, nor he. No present, nor past, nor future. It is beyond time and space, beyond expression. It is ever there. Just as a plantain tree produces shoots at its roots before yielding fruits and perishing, and these shoots, being transplanted, do the same again, so also the original primeval master of antiquity, Dakshinamurti, who cleared the doubts of his rishi disciples in silence, has left shoots which are ever multiplying. The Guru is a shoot of that Dakshinamurti. The question does not arise when the self is realized.
Visitor.
Does Maharishi enter the Nirvikalpa Samadhi?
Maharshi.
If the eyes are closed, it is Nirvikalpa. If open, it is Savikalpa. The ever-present state is the natural state, Sahaja.